Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on NeffordsRadio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday. It's January 1st. Happy New Year. January 1st, 2019. I'm still writing 2018 on the checks. I don't write anymore. And, boy, I should just cash that stupid old check in already. Somebody's waiting for that one to clear. Wow. Okay. So, good morning. Welcome to a brand new show. No, we're not broadcasting live. We've pre-recorded this one for you because, well, originally I didn't want to get up early to actually do the show because, I'm tired. But as it turns out, the way things are going to work, I think technically today I'm going to have to wake up to at least press the play button on the show. So I could have done it, but, I'd rather be able to press the play button and either watch the tape roll or walk away and let you have a brand new show without my straining everything. In order to bring you one live, we'll be straining everything to bring you one live on Wednesday when Greg Dworkin and hopefully Joan McCarter rejoin us. Lots to catch up on there. And I have a feeling we'll have lots to talk about. That'll be on January 2nd, the day before the January 3rd reconvening of the Congress for the 116th Congress with a majority in the House of Representatives in the hands of Democrats. We'll guess a little bit about what they might be doing with that majority on that day and going forward. Lots to check in on, and we have to get back to the question of just what the hell are we going to do about this whole Green New Deal committee. I've been troubled by this, not because of the idea of actually forming such a committee, but mostly because of, the familiar old game of watching activists push for this thing to be formed, and it's not coming out exactly as they wanted. And in some cases, it's beginning to look like it might not come out at all. And, it's always worrisome to see newly enthused activists give up on things and say, the first inclination very often is to say, things are hopelessly rigged against us. And sometimes that is true. And sometimes it's a matter of learning what the rules are and how to navigate them. And I'm a little bit worried about the way the push for the committee is coming out because, of course, as the details begin to solidify about what they're looking for, or sometimes that they're solidifying in the negative. That is, we're finding out what the leadership isn't allowing and hearing about that. Sometimes in drips and drabs, sometimes in large chunks, but we find out what the activists interested in forming the committee were pushing for by way of finding out what's been rejected. And I've become a little concerned because some of the things that I'm finding being rejected, along with the dejectedness that goes along with being rejected, I'm finding along the way that it looks like there wasn't really a solid plan in place for getting this committee formed in the way they wanted, or else maybe the plans for getting the committee formed in the way that they wanted don't really fit well at all within the rules within the Congress traditionally operates. And it may be time to throw those traditional rules away, or at least part of them. So I'm willing to entertain some of that. But I'm sure we'll get more discussion in on that subject come tomorrow when Joan happens by. And hey, if not, Thursday and Friday we can give over to that too. We'll see what they do with it on Thursday. The case won't be closed, by the way, on the Green New Deal Committee by any stretch of the imagination on Thursday. There's still an opportunity to push for the formation of the committee. And I don't even know that any of the parties involved thought that they would have this new committee hammered out and finished for Thursday. And that'll take some time. Don't look for all the answers to come on Thursday. But just to give you, I guess I could give you a taste of what I've been thinking might become a problem, and we might as well because we've got more time to fill on today's pre-recorded show. Here's what worried me a little bit. A tweet can you believe it, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I don't want to characterize it negatively here. So I'll just say it read that the push for the Green New Deal Committee had three basic demands that went with it. And it's a loaded word, demands, but I think she actually uses that term. And they were as follows. Well, let's see. I'm going to have to bring it up here real quick. Let's see. Want to get back one or two on this. So I thought I had it at the ready, but of course, why would that have happened? Okay. Well, at any rate, the demands essentially were first, and they were put in this order, and I don't know what order, whether this is supposed to be most important to least important or just the way they occurred to her. But one, that no one on the committee should be beholden to fossil fuel interests, which is a nice thing to think about. She put it, no fossil fuel money on climate committee. Number two, offer solutions for impacted communities. That sounds like a good thing if I understand what it means at all. And I think it's supposed to be just shorthand for okay, impacted communities like Flint, Michigan, right? We should be putting them in our solutions. Great. And three, draft the sample Green New Deal, which was, I think, the entire point of convening such a committee. So also good. We like it. It should be like this. Well, anyway, the problem, as it turns out, is all three, she says, were rejected as, quote, too controversial, which is sort of an inflammatory end to it. Oh, it's a tweet thread. She explains herself a little bit later on. But it's an inflammatory conclusion to it because that, of course, has gotten the activists' dander up, which is okay. That's the way activists are supposed to be. I'm going out of my way, bending over backwards to say, look, it's all okay here. Nobody's in trouble with me or anything like that. But, and who could care if you were? But, to say, okay, all three were rejected as too controversial smacks a little bit to me of the sort of story, you frequently do hear from activists of all sorts. We have to stand up because so-and-so was arrested for telling the truth. And last time I checked, this was a free country. Yeah, I know. I understand all of that. Rarely are people arrested for telling the truth. There's usually some more to the story along the lines of, I was arrested for telling the truth by chaining myself to the front door of this organization I'm protesting, which has its own problems. So were all three rejected as too controversial? I don't know. But in no particular order, I thought we would start with number one, no fossil fuel money on climate committee. How in the world do you implement such a demand? I might ask. And I might even come up with a solution for you. And I really think that there's possibly, if you're willing to bend a few rules, and we might as well be willing to bend a few rules. After all, everyone will remind us there's an existential crisis here. And so we'll take that seriously and say, maybe we do bend all the rules a little bit. No fossil fuel money on climate committee. That's the way I would want it. How do I arrange that? How do I enforce that? Who will be on this committee? How do I decide? How do we usually decide who's on a committee? I don't know how much thought has been given to the mechanics of how a committee is formed and how a committee is populated. I would not be surprised if that was not the case. It's not always common knowledge. But if we were to agree, let's say, putting aside all concerns about what is fossil fuel money, if we were to agree on some sort of universal list, if you have taken money from these organizations, you're disqualified from service on the Green New Deal Committee. That's really an extraordinary restriction on who can be on the committee. But under ordinary circumstances, I would say you would be okay proposing that the Democratic caucus not name as its nominees to a committee. And remember, committees are creatures of the House, the full House. You would be okay proposing, and you might even get past a proposal that says no one can be nominated to membership on the Green New Deal Committee from the Democratic caucus if they take money from these organizations. I really doubt you could get that rule passed, but you could try. And, the vote against the rule would be entrenched interest legitimately against your position. That you'd be right in complaining about getting shut down in that one. You would be shut down. You'd probably lose, but you'd be in the right in asking for that vote. The Republicans, though, would not be interested in being bound by that rule. And unless you're talking about going to the floor of the House with a proposal to form a brand new Green New Deal committee, which, as I understand it, is going to focus on some pretty sweeping legislation to, reconfigure, if they can, the entirety of the United States economy in a green direction. In other words, to take on the existential crisis and make this a huge priority and make sweeping changes that point us not only towards a green future, but a sustainable, economically sustainable green future, I think. Well, to propose something like that and to say at the outset, and there's not going to be a single Republican allowed on the committee, seems like trouble, to say the least. It's a bad look, and maybe we don't care about bad looks. The planet's in crisis. Do I care about how we look? Let's say for the argument that I don't. And let's say for the sake of argument that I'm willing to try to say, all right, well, the House majority is in the hands of the Democrats. Let's use it. Let's muscle it through. Yes, we will form a committee where Republicans aren't allowed. Whew. I mean, that's a tall order. And just in terms of the dynamics of the House, it's not that overwhelming a majority in the hands of Democrats. I think that as the House, as it currently stands, and not knowing what to do with North Carolina's 9th district, it doesn't make much difference one way or the other. You are talking about 235 Democrats, give or take, in the House, and 199, give or take, Republicans in the House. A majority of the House being 218 votes. At this stage of the game, if you lose 17, 18 Democratic votes on a proposal to, once again, the proposal is a new committee with sweeping powers to remake the, entire United States economy. Not that they'll actually grant it those powers. I mean, they've weakened the committee considerably, but any committee, it really wouldn't matter what the committee was, a small business committee, any committee you care to name, literally no Republicans allowed. And only the most progressive Democrats, by the way. I mean, not that that would matter that much to Republicans, but you're not going to get a Republican vote for that. You wouldn't get on the other hand, like I've been saying, you wouldn't get a Republican vote for the formation of this committee, period, no matter how you constitute it. So again, I'm open to just completely throwing the rule book out on this one because the results are the same. What's the difference? I'll be fair to Republicans. They still won't vote for it. And I could be fair to Republicans. I still might find 18, 19 Democrats who say Green New Deal. What the hell? No. And they may vote no. Terrible. I'm not with them. I'm against them. I want the committee formed. But you're working with some small margins here. And that's how a committee is formed. You don't just say we're having a committee. Well, some activists demanded it, so there it is. It's a committee. It's an act of the House to form a committee. You got to be sure you're going to get 218 votes together for this thing. And starting out with a committee that says nope to Republicans, as much fun as that would be, I don't know if I've got 218 votes to get it done. But if you do, God bless you. Now, why wouldn't I have Republicans on the committee? Remember, the rule is you can't take fossil fuel dollars and be on the committee. If you would try to make that a House rule, I don't know what would happen. I really have no idea. I imagine you fail. If you tried to make it a committee rule, I guess that would be interesting, except what do you have to do before you make a committee rule? You got to form a committee, and the committee's got to adopt that rule. That's going to be a little tough. Although, again, if you put together a small committee of 20 people, that would be a relatively small House committee, and 11 Dems and 9 Republicans, or 12 Dems and 8 Republicans, if you wanted to really exercise your muscle, you'd win the vote. I mean, if you had a chairperson who said the rule is that you're not allowed to serve on this committee if you take any money from the following organizations, although I don't know what you do with them. I mean, you'd have to throw all the Republicans, presumably, off the committee right away. If you could find 8 Republicans in the entirety of the House who've not taken any money from any fossil fuel interests, I would be very surprised. But if you could, great, more power to you. Now, I think those would have to be the 8, and those 8 might not agree to serve on that committee. I don't know. In fact, I don't know how many Democrats you would find that really literally take zero fossil fuel interest money at all. But presumably, you could draw from among the ranks of the 30 plus members who pledge not to take such money either in the future or who haven't taken it so far. You have the numbers. The question is, would they all, or some significant portion of them, all agree to serve on this other committee as well? Many of them may want to be on the Ways and Means Committee, which is generally considered to be an exclusive committee. You'd have to now get some waivers for people who are on exclusive committees, appropriations, Ways and Means, etc. A few top committees like that. Plus, you have to find the time to be able to serve on these committees. And you remember, you're in a rush job here. You got to finish revamping the American economy by January 1st, 2020. I don't know how many people are really going to serve on this committee effectively. Anyway, there's a lot to think about. We could expand on this and then occupy the entirety of the show with it. It's just, I put it out here, frankly, because I don't want to hear the responses quite honestly right now on Twitter. You propose a problem like this and immediately, then you got to spend the next day and a half, week and a half defending yourself from being a sellout and you love oil money. And I'm just trying to help you make this committee. I'd love to see this committee formed. It would be fantastic. It just has to be realistic. And I don't mean in its goals. I mean in its physical form. I don't know how, I'm not certain that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for instance, has any idea that the number one rule of the committee means forming a committee that purposefully by rule excludes Republicans. She may be fine with that. I am not troubled by that in my personal sense, but I don't care. Screw them. They're not going to vote for anything. But I know that I'm dealing with Democrats in the House who are going to say, oh my God, that's a huge violation of everything we stand for. I think. I don't know. What do we stand for? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's not. Maybe we get past them. It's just, we're going to get pummeled for it. And maybe, again, we're going to get pummeled for it anyway. I said the other day, it's always a situation with Democrats that, we say, well, let's not do this thing. Let's not, by rule, exclude Republicans from or any role on this committee, because if we do, we'll be accused of all sorts of totalitarianism, et cetera, et cetera. It's a socialist dictatorship. And Democrats love to say, you can't accuse us of socialist dictatorship. We're going to allow Republicans on this committee. You can't accuse us of being a bunch of dictators now. And the natural response will be, you're a bunch of dictators. Democrats love dictatorship. They love dictatorship and they hate America. That's what Republicans will say. And we'll all go, damn it. Once again, I was sure that we could not be accused of this thing, and yet we were. And what are we going to do about it? Well, so maybe you just say, screw it for this committee. Let's even accept that that's a possibility. Then, of course, either you're excluding all Republicans from the committees and Chuck Todd vomits on you for all eternity. Or two, you say, all right, we're never going to get Republicans who will agree to abide by this rule, but who cares? They're going to vote against us all the time anyway. Let's just put them on here and let them vote against us, and we steamroller them and we win them with our automatic majority. That's actually the way most committees work, so that's cool. You'll be okay with that. The only difficulty with that is then, of course, troublemaking jerks who sit on this committee just to drag its feet behind it in the form of minorities, will be able to take all the oil and gas money they want and will be paid handsomely for doing their best to screw up the work of the committee. Whereas the Democrats who came to do the serious work of the committee will be unilaterally hamstrung. Not that they didn't want to be hamstrung from getting fossil fuel money. They'll be happy about that, presumably. But, once again, you end up in a situation where it's, Democrats agree to abide by the rules and Republicans are given a waiver for the rules. Let's go to work. I'm not sure that works out all that well either. But for the sake of argument, we can try it. The only question is, has anybody thought about how this thing will work. And only then do we get into the question of what is fossil fuel money? Exxon is fossil fuel money. Amoco, I don't know, there's another gas station. Fossil fuel money, yes. Nuclear power, not fossil fuel. How do we feel about nuclear power and all this? I understand that a lot of good green activists these days are saying, as dangerous as nuclear power can be and as disreputable as it can be and as undesirable as it can be, it doesn't add to global warming, and that's our immediate and most pressing issue, and we might have to include a nuclear component in all of this. But I don't speak for the movement. I don't know enough about it to even try. But I don't know. So is nuclear power money in or out on this? What about nuclear power interests that also have fossil fuel interests elsewhere? I don't know. I'm not sure what to say about it. Everybody who deals in fossil fuels, or just production companies, just refining companies, holding companies that just deal in the finance of fossil fuels, Home Depot because they sell propane. What are the limits? So we have to start setting the rules on these things, and those rules are writable. It's not hard. Well, I wouldn't want to write them, but it's doable. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is presumably perfectly capable of doing that. I don't know if that's how she wants to spend her day, but some members do. Which members? Who? Can we get them on the committee? And can the committee, presumably the committee comes up with those rules, right? Well, I don't know whether the demand is still that these rules have to be in place before the committee is formed. Or can the committee get together and write these rules? And who writes them? And will it be a subcommittee that writes them? And eventually we're going to have to vote on them. We'll get no Republican votes for them, but that's okay. There'll be a majority of Democrats on the committee. We'll have our rules. We'll have our list. Then I guess the question of what happens if somebody violates that rule at some point. Do we throw the person off the committee? How do you throw a person off the committee? Throw a person off the committee by having a floor vote to remove them by resolution from the committee. Can we have a rule in the committee that says there will be no floor vote at the say-so of the chairperson? You're just expelled, and your chair is declared vacant, and we pick another member. I guess you can try. It's never been done that way, but why don't you try? But there's a lot of logistics to work out, which is why it won't be worked out by the 3rd, and why some serious thought is required, and why I'm so hesitant to get into the discussion of it on Twitter, because I won't be able to get through any of these points for lack of time, because I'll be, like I said, busy defending myself from being an oil millionaire, which I so obviously am. Anyway, it's going to be tough going, but that's not what we're here to talk about. This was just by way of lengthy introduction to bring you to the stories that I have pre-recorded for your listening pleasure and to keep you up to date on the news as I anticipate it will break throughout the rest of the week. And without further ado, and I hope without running over our time limits, let me present to you the rest of what I've prepared for you today. Here's a piece from Gizmodo. The Amazon Alexa eavesdropping nightmare came true. It's dated back a little bit, the 20th of December. Maybe you heard the story. If not, I'll pass this one on. Jennings Brown is the writer on this one. I feel like this is an eventuality that we anticipated a little bit on the show. Talked about electronic eavesdropping at home in various forms, but this one I think probably among the more obvious, of course, dealing with the Amazon Alexa, putting a microphone in your house and asking it to listen for your instructions is pretty much an invitation to this sort of nightmare. But this one had a little bit of a twist. An Amazon user in Germany recently requested data about his personal activities and inadvertently gained access to 1,700 audio recordings of someone he didn't know. This is reported by Germany's CT magazine. I have no idea actually how that's pronounced. It's actually lowercase c apostrophe t, which presents me with something of a dilemma. But I looked it up, and CT it's an abbreviation or contraction of computer technique or Technik. I'm not sure. Nick. Computer Technik. You know how the Germans mash all their words together into one. So the name of the magazine is Computer Technik. That is computer technology, and they contract it into C''T. I don't know what they say by way of shorthand out there, but I don't know. That's not actually the point. The point is that this magazine reported that in August, the Amazon user, exercising his rights under the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, you have much more right to demand what data various providers are holding specifically about you. You get to inspect it if you want to. Well, he requested his own data that Amazon had stored. 2 months later, Amazon sent him a downloadable 100 megabyte zip file. Okay, so not no problem with complying with the law at this point. Some of the files reportedly related to his Amazon searches, but according to the report, there were also hundreds of WAV files and a PDF cataloging transcripts of Alexa's interpretations of voice commands, which is what you would expect to get from your Alexa, right? But according to CT Magazine, this was peculiar to this user because he doesn't own any Alexa devices and had never used the service. He also didn't recognize the voices in the files. So I suppose you would expect those interpretations of voice commands in an Alexa's memory if you had an Alexa. If you don't have an Alexa, well, that will come as a surprise to you. So whose stuff did he get? The user reported the matter to Amazon and asked for information. He reportedly didn't receive a response, but soon found that the link to the data was dead. So they read it and turned it off. However, he had already saved the files, and he shared his experience with CT Magazine out of concern that the person whose privacy had been compromised was not told about the mistake. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So CT Magazine listened to many of the files and was able, quote, to piece together a detailed picture of the customer concerned and his personal habits. It found that he used Alexa in various places, has an Echo at home, and has a Fire device on his TV. They noticed that a woman was around at times. They listened to him in the shower, which listening to someone in the shower isn't necessarily, everything that's cracked up to, I don't know, it's not cracked up to be anything, but I suppose you'd rather see people in the shower, although some people you'd prefer not to and maybe just want to listen to them. Besides which, who knows? Maybe he sings in the shower. Anyway, CT Magazine is then quoted here, going on to say, "We were able to navigate around a complete stranger's private life without his knowledge." By the way, was it legal for him? I know that Amazon turned over the data to this person, but it was accidental. I don't know what the EU's code would say about his turning someone else's data, even accidentally released to him, over to a magazine for analysis and publication. But I guess they were trying to prove a larger point here. As they say, we were able to navigate around a complete stranger's private life without his knowledge, and the immoral, almost voyeuristic nature of what we were doing got our hair standing on end. The alarms, Spotify commands, and public transport inquiries included in the data revealed a lot about the victim's personal habits, their jobs, and their taste in music. Using these files, it was fairly easy to identify the person involved and his female companion. That's the worrisome part. Weather queries, first names, and even someone's last name enabled us to quickly zero in on his circle of friends. Public data from Facebook and Twitter rounded out the picture. Now back to Gizmodo here. Using the information they gathered from the recordings, the magazine contacted the victim of the data leak. He was audibly shocked, and they know he was audibly shocked because they listened to his Alexa, and confirmed it was him in the recordings and that the outlet had figured out the identity of his girlfriend. He said Amazon did not contact him. Days later, both the victim and the receiver of the files were called by Amazon to discuss the incident. Both were reportedly called 3 days after CT Magazine contacted Amazon about the matter. An Amazon representative reportedly told them that one of their staff members had made a one-time error. When asked for comment on the matter, Amazon sent Gizmodo the same statement it had shared with Reuters. Quote, "This was an unfortunate case of human error and an isolated incident. We have resolved the issue with the 2 customers involved and have taken steps to further improve our processes. We were also in touch on a precautionary basis with the relevant regulatory authorities." Unquote. Amazon did not answer Gizmodo's questions about how a human error led to this privacy infringement or whether the company had initially contacted the victim to inform them their sensitive information was shared with a stranger. The recordings of the victim were from May. That same month, a Portland woman found her Echo had sent a recorded conversation between her and her husband to one of his employees. Amazon said the virtual assistant misinterpreted speech as an order to send the conversation to a contact. That's the more mundane of the nightmares. I don't know whether the outcome of that was any more mundane than anything else. It might have been horrific, but one of the more easily imaginable mistakes and nightmares that comes along with one of these electronic assistants, I guess. Just, you imagine yourself saying something about, or casually commenting to someone at home that you wanted to email Bob about something or other. And, off in the distance, barely audible, if audible at all, your electronic assistant says, "Emailing Bob." And who knows what they're emailing them. Yeah, you can easily imagine those things. This other one, it's certainly far worse and far scarier in that they have these files available and that they might send them to the wrong person. But presumably the process goes correctly more than 90% of the time. That's the real problem, is there's so many people would create so many files that even a 99.9% success rate in getting the process right means, 100,000 people's files are being sent to the wrong person each year. That's troublesome and scary. I'm not too wild about those devices. I think we all saw the warning signs. I don't know. Do any of you have them at home? Are any of you worried about things like that? I recently did. I did get into the market for one of them because actually I was thinking about using it for thinking about maybe it would make a good device around the house for for my in-laws who are having difficulty getting around all the time, and I thought maybe it might be worth the trade-off to be able to turn bedroom lights on and off without getting up, or maybe turning on the coffee pot in the morning or something like that. And they were unlikely to be sharing state secrets with one another or with anyone else and accidentally email them. But that's the excuse we always use, to let them in the door. I thought it would make a nice home assistant, but I do worry about those things, and so do they. They're actually probably more paranoid about the idea of data being stolen than I am. I don't know what it is about it that does it for them. I think they just see horror stories on television. That should be enough to stand anyone's hair on end, I guess. Anyhow, just interesting. I thought it was interesting that this stuff is finally manifesting itself, and the horror stories are, in some cases, even a little worse than you might have imagined. Well, perhaps we can make it sort of a Tech Tuesday by taking a look at Max Fisher's article in the New York Times. I mentioned it before the weekend. If you didn't get a chance to thumb through it, maybe we can do that here. This is the one that he introduced with his tweet last Friday, saying, "I spent months reporting on an aspect of Facebook that's far more significant than most realize: moderation. Facebook, I found, is going further than it has acknowledged, exerting tremendous and largely unseen power over our politics and societies." So, sounds like an interesting view of the tech giant. I thought we might take a look at it and spend our New Year's Day that way. And it'll probably, it might give you a headache, but you might be hungover already. Anyway, might not be ready to dive back directly into politics, but this is an interesting way of easing back in tangentially to the subject. Inside Facebook's secret rule book for global political speech. There's that word, political. Under fire for stirring up distrust and violence, the social network has vowed to police its users, but leaked documents raise serious questions about its approach. Again, Max Fisher is the writer here, and this one published last Thursday, December 27th, actually. Menlo Park, California, the headquarters is the dateline here. In a glass conference room at its California headquarters, Facebook is taking on the bonfires of hate and misinformation it has helped fuel across the world, one post at a time. The social network has drawn criticism for undermining democracy and for provoking bloodshed in societies small and large. But for Facebook, it's also a business problem. The company, which makes about $5 billion in profit per quarter, has to show that it is serious about removing dangerous content. It must also continue to attract more users from more countries and try to keep them on the site longer. How can Facebook monitor billions of posts per day in over 100 languages, all without disturbing the endless expansion that is core to its business? Maybe that's the problem. The company's solution: a network of workers using a maze of PowerPoint slides spelling out what's forbidden. Every other Tuesday morning, like today, although I don't know which one it is, whether they're on or off today. Probably off, right? Several dozen Facebook employees gather over breakfast to come up with the rules, hashing out what the site's 2 billion users should be allowed to say. Yikes. The guidelines that emerge from these meetings are sent out to 7,500 plus moderators around the world. After publication of this article, Facebook said it had increased that number to around 15,000. Interesting. That's a pretty quick reaction to double your workforce, but they may just mean that in between the time they told them in interviews and the time of publication, they doubled their numbers. Though we do keep hearing around the Twitter universe that there are people who have left in frustration and have insisted that they're not really doing half of what they say they're doing. But we'll continue on. The closely held rules are extensive, and they make the company a far more powerful arbiter of global speech than has been publicly recognized or acknowledged by the company itself, the New York Times has found. The Times was provided with more than 1,400 pages from the rule books by an employee who said he feared that the company was exercising too much power with too little oversight and making too many mistakes. So there are dissidents who say they're doing too much, and there are those who say that they're doing too little as well. An examination of the files revealed numerous gaps, biases, and outright errors. As Facebook employees grope for the right answers, they have allowed extremist language to flourish in some countries while censoring mainstream speech in others. Moderators were once told, for example, to remove fundraising appeals for volcano victims in Indonesia because a co-sponsor of the drive was on Facebook's internal list of banned groups. In Myanmar, a paperwork error allowed a prominent extremist group accused of fomenting genocide to stay on the platform for months. In India, moderators were mistakenly told to flag for possible removal comments critical of religion. The Facebook employees who meet to set the guidelines, mostly young engineers and lawyers, try to distill highly complex issues into simple yes or no rules. Then the company outsources much of the actual post-by-post moderation to companies that enlist largely unskilled workers, many hired out of call centers. Those moderators, at times relying on Google Translate, have mere seconds to recall countless rules and apply them to the hundreds of posts that dash across their screens each day. When is a reference to jihad, for example, forbidden? When is a crying laughter emoji a warning sign? Moderators express frustration at rules they say don't always make sense and sometimes require them to leave up posts that they fear could lead to violence. You feel like you killed someone by not acting, one said, speaking on the condition of anonymity because he had signed a non-disclosure agreement. Facebook executives say they are working diligently to rid the platform of dangerous posts. It's not our place to correct people's speech, but we do want to enforce our community standards on our platform, said Sarah Su, just S-U, Su, a senior engineer on the news feed. When you're in our community, we want to make sure that we're balancing freedom of expression and safety. Sounds like a good idea. Monica Bickert, Facebook's head of global policy management, said that the primary goal was to prevent harm, and that to a great extent the company had been successful. But perfection, she said, is not possible. We have billions of posts every day. We're identifying more and more potential violations using our technical systems, Ms. Bickert said. At that scale, even if you're 99% accurate, sounds familiar, you're going to have a lot of mistakes. And now the section on the rules. The Facebook guidelines do not look like a handbook for regulating global politics. They consist of dozens of unorganized PowerPoint presentations and Excel spreadsheets with bureaucratic titles like Western Balkans Hate Orgs and Figures and Credible Violence Implementation Standards. Because Facebook drifted into this approach somewhat by accident, there is no single master file or overarching guide, just a patchwork of rules set out by different parts of the company. Facebook confirmed the authenticity of the documents, though it said some had been updated since the Times acquired them. The company's goal is ambitious: to reduce context-heavy questions that even legal experts might struggle with. When is an idea hateful? When is a rumor dangerous? To one-size-fits-all rules. By telling moderators to follow the rules blindly, Facebook hopes to guard against bias and to enforce consistency. It's not going to work all that well, but okay, it's an interesting idea. You got to decide one way or another at the outset, right? Facebook says the files are only for training, but moderators say they are used as day-to-day reference materials. Taken individually, each rule might make sense, but in their Byzantine totality, they can be a bit baffling. One document sets out several rules just to determine when a word, like martyr or jihad, indicates pro-terrorism speech. Another describes when discussion of a barred group should be forbidden. Words like brother or comrade probably, it says probably, cross the line. So do any of a dozen emojis. And there's an embedded slide of which ones are apparently troubling, too. It's pretty remarkable. The guidelines for identifying hate speech, a problem that has bedeviled Facebook, run to 200 jargon-filled head-spinning pages. Moderators must sort a post into one of 3 tiers of severity. They must bear in mind lists like the 6 designated dehumanizing comparisons, among them comparing Jews to rats. Yes, that's not a nice one. There's a real tension here between wanting to have nuances to account for every situation and wanting to have a set of policies we can enforce accurately and we can explain cleanly, says Ms. Bickert, the Facebook executive. Though the Facebook employees who make the rules are largely free to set policy however they wish, and often do so in the room, they also consult with outside groups. We're not drawing these lines in a vacuum, Ms. Bickert said. On to a section entitled An Unseen Branch of Government. As detailed as the guidelines can be, there are also approximations, best guesses at how to fight extremism or disinformation. And they are leading Facebook to intrude into sensitive political matters the world over, sometimes clumsily. Increasingly, the decisions on what posts should be barred amount to regulating political speech, and not just on the fringes. In many countries, extremism and the mainstream are blurring. In the United States, Facebook banned the Proud Boys, a far-right pro-Trump group. The company also blocked an inflammatory ad about a caravan of Central American migrants that was produced by President Trump's political team. In June, According to internal emails reviewed by The Times, moderators were told to allow users to praise the Taliban, normally a forbidden practice, if they mentioned its decision to enter into a ceasefire. In another email, moderators were told to hunt down and remove rumors wrongly accusing an Israeli soldier of killing a Palestinian medic. Facebook's role has become so hegemonic, so monopolistic, that it has become a force unto itself, said Jasmine Mujanovic. I'm guessing it Mujanovic, Mujanovic, an expert on the Balkans. No one entity, especially not a for-profit venture like Facebook, should have that kind of power to influence public debate and policy. It is an interesting point, and going back a paragraph or two, I find it interesting that they actually went ahead and banned that inflammatory ad about the caravan, even though it was produced by President Trump's political team. Ordinarily, you see or you imagine that corporations would give an extremist point of view backed by people closely tied with the President of the United States a pass on these things, that almost by definition, political messaging by the campaign or re-elect campaign for the President of the United States is deemed mainstream and within the permissible bounds of political discourse by definition. But I'm glad that Trump's stuff is subjected to the same standards, even if they do it wrong. In Pakistan, shortly before elections were held in July, Facebook issued its moderators a 40-page document outlining political parties, expected trends, and guidelines. Pakistan, one of the world's largest and most fragile democracies, enforces an election day blackout on campaigning. Facebook is a center of news and discussion during voting. The document most likely shaped these conversations, even if Pakistanis themselves had no way of knowing it. Moderators were urged, in one instance, to apply extra scrutiny to Jamiat Ulema, Islam. Hoping I'm somewhere close to correct pronunciation on that, a hardline religious party. But another religious party, Jamaat-e-Islami, was described as benign. Though Facebook says its focus is protecting users, the documents suggest that other concerns come into play. Pakistan's guidelines warn moderators against creating a PR fire by taking any action that could, quote, have a negative impact on Facebook's reputation or even put the company at legal risk, unquote. In India, Chinmayi Arun, again, hopefully not too far off, and a legal scholar, identified troubling mistakes in Facebook's guidelines. One slide tells moderators that any post degrading an entire religion violates Indian law and should be flagged for removal. It is a significant curb on speech and apparently incorrect. Indian law prohibits blasphemy only in certain conditions, Ms. Arun said, such as when the speaker intends to inflame violence. Another slide says that Indian law prohibits calls for an independent Kashmir, which some legal scholars dispute. The slide instructs moderators to, quote, look out for the phrase free Kashmir, though the slogan, common among activists, is completely legal. Facebook says it is simply urging moderators to apply extra scrutiny to posts that use the phrase. Still, even this could chill activism in Kashmir. And it is not clear that the distinction will be obvious to moderators who were warned that ignoring violations could get Facebook blocked in India. Next section, things explode really fast. In the absence of governments or international bodies that can set standards, Facebook is experimenting with its own. The company never set out to play this role, but in an effort to control problems of its own creation, it has quietly become, with a speed that makes even employees uncomfortable, what is arguably one of the world's most powerful political regulators. A lot of this would be a lot easier if there were authoritative third parties that had the answer, said Brian Fishman, a counterterrorism expert who works with Facebook. That sounds like you're creating the opportunity for someone to get in there and hijack the whole system and have another third-party private business dictate the standards instead of Facebook. And I don't know if that's any better. Sometimes these things explode really fast, Mr. Fishman said, and we have to figure out what our reaction's going to be, and we don't have time for the UN. But the results can be uneven. Consider the guidelines for the Balkans, where rising nationalism is threatening to reignite old violence. The file on that region, not updated since 2016, includes odd errors. Ratko Mladic, a Bosnian war criminal still celebrated by extremists, is described as a fugitive. In fact, he was arrested in 2011. The slides are apparently written for English speakers relying on Google Translate, suggesting that Facebook remains short on moderators who speak local languages and who might understand local contexts crucial for identifying inflammatory speech. And Google Translate can be unreliable. Mr. Mladic is referred to in one slide as Rodney Young. That's inexplicable, unless, does Mladic mean young by any chance in whatever language we're speaking here? I have no idea. Anyway, the guidelines, said Mr. Mujanovic, the Balkans expert, appear dangerously out of date. They have little to say about ultranationalist groups stoking political violence in the region. Nearly every Facebook employee who spoke to the Times cited, as proof of the company's competence, its response after the United Nations accused the platform of exacerbating genocide in Myanmar. The employees pointed to Facebook's ban this spring on any positive mention of Ma Ba Tha, how have I ruined that one, an extremist group that has been using the platform to incite violence against Muslims since 2014. But puzzled activists in Myanmar say that months later, posts supporting the group remain widespread. The culprit may be Facebook's own rules. Guidelines for policing hate speech in Myanmar instruct moderators not to remove posts supporting Ma Ba Tha, or Ta, depending on how you prefer to mangle the name. Facebook corrected the mistake only in response to an inquiry from the Times. Employees also touted their decision to shut down Facebook accounts belonging to senior military officials in Myanmar, but the company did not initially notify Myanmar's government, leading the barred officers to conclude that they had been hacked. Some blamed Aung San Suu Kyi, my goodness, the country's de facto civilian leader, whose name I would actually know if I were up to speed on what's going on in Myanmar, but are you? D-A-W, Aung San Suu Kyi. And the episode deepened distrust between her and the military, lawmakers say. Next up, the hate list. Facebook's most politically consequential document may be an Excel spreadsheet that names every group and individual the company has quietly barred as a hate figure. Moderators are instructed to remove any post praising, supporting, or representing any listed figure. Anton Shekhovstov. We'll leave it at that. An expert in far-right groups, who I guess is not actually banned himself, said he was confused about the methodology. Well, that'll get you banned. The company bans an impressive array of American and British groups, he said, but relatively few in countries where the far right can be more violent, particularly Russia or Ukraine. Now, that's exactly where they would need to be banned, but easy to imagine why they wouldn't be, because you'll get your ass kicked. Or murdered is more like it. Countries where Facebook faces government pressure seem to be better covered than those where it does not. Facebook blocks dozens of far-right groups in Germany, where the authorities scrutinize the social network, but only one in neighboring Austria. bet that's true. And any place that they aren't going to get in trouble for being lackadaisical about it, they will be. The list includes a growing number of groups with one foot in the political mainstream, like the far-right Golden Dawn, which holds seats in the Greek and European Union parliaments. For a tech company to draw these lines is extremely problematic, said Jonas Kaiser, a Harvard University expert on online extremism. It puts social networks in the position to make judgment calls that are traditionally the job of the courts. The bans are a kind of shortcut, said Sana Jaffrey, who studies Indonesian politics at the University of Chicago. Asking moderators to look for a banned name or logo is easier than asking them to make judgment calls about when political views are dangerous. But that means, in much of Asia and the Middle East, Facebook bans hardline religious groups that represent significant segments of society. Blanket prohibitions, Ms. Jaffrey said, amount to Facebook shutting down one side in national debates, and its decisions often skew in favor of governments, which can fine or regulate Facebook. In Sri Lanka, Facebook removed posts commemorating members of the Tamil minority who died in the country's civil war. Facebook bans any positive mention of Tamil rebels, though users can praise government forces who were also guilty of atrocities. Kate Cronin-Furman, a Sri Lanka expert at University College London, said this prevented Tamils from memorializing the war, allowing the government to impose its version of events, entrenching Tamils' second-class status. And next up, the view from Menlo Park. Facebook's policies might emerge from well-appointed conference rooms, but they are executed largely by moderators in drab outsourcing offices in distant locations like Morocco and the Philippines. Facebook says moderators are given ample time to review posts and don't have quotas. Moderators say they face pressure to review about 1,000 pieces of content per day. They have 8 to 10 seconds for each post, longer for videos. The moderators describe feeling in over their heads. For some, pay is tied to speed and accuracy. Many last only a few exhausting months. Frontline moderators have few mechanisms for alerting Facebook to new threats or holes in the rules, and little incentive to try, one said. One moderator described an office-wide rule to approve any post if no one on hand can read the appropriate language. This may have contributed to violence in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, where posts encouraging ethnic cleansing were routinely allowed to stay up. Facebook says that any such practice would violate its rules, which include contingencies for reviewing posts in unfamiliar languages. Justin Osofsky, a Facebook vice president who oversees these contracts, said any corner cutting probably came from mid-level managers at outside companies acting on their own. This hints at a deeper problem. Facebook has little visibility into the giant outsourcing companies, which largely police themselves, and has at times struggled to control them. And because Facebook relies on the companies to support its expansion, its leverage over them is limited. One hurdle to reining in inflammatory speech on Facebook may be Facebook itself. The platform relies on an algorithm that tends to promote the most provocative content, sometimes of the sort the company says it wants to suppress. Facebook could blunt that algorithm or slow the company's expansion into new markets where it has proved most disruptive, but the social network instills in employees an almost unquestioned faith in their product as a force for good. When Ms. Su, the newsfeed engineer, was asked if she believed research finding that more Facebook usage correlates with more violence, she replied, "I don't think so." As we have greater reach, as we have more people engaging, that raises the stakes, she said, but I also think that there's greater opportunity for people to be exposed to new ideas. Still, even some executives hesitate when asked whether the company has found the right formula. Richard Allen, a London-based vice president who was also a sitting member of the House of Lords, said a better model might be some partnership arrangement with governments involved in setting the standards, even if not all governments can be trusted with this power. Mr. Fishman, the Facebook terrorism expert, said the company should consider deferring more decisions to moderators who may better understand the nuances of local culture and politics. But at company headquarters, the most fundamental questions of all remain unanswered. What sorts of content lead directly to violence? When does the platform exacerbate social tensions? Rosa Birch, who leads an internal crisis team, said she and her colleagues had been posing these questions for years. They are making progress, she said, but will probably never have definitive answers. But without a full understanding of the platform's impact, most policies are just ad hoc responses to problems as they emerge. Employees make a tweak, wait to see what happens, then tweak again, as if repairing an airplane mid-flight. In the meantime, the company continues to expand its reach to more users in more countries. One of the reasons why it's hard to talk about, Mr. Fishman said, is because there's a lack of societal agreement on where this sort of authority should lie. But, he said, it's harder to figure out what a better alternative is. And so concludes that rather lengthy article. Interesting, and once again, puzzling, just to try and see these guys try and work this stuff out. Not that long ago, they all just wanted to be a place where you could post reviews over which of the women in your freshman incoming class were hot and which ones were not, or whatever, or trying to get the names and numbers of where they could meet these women. It was a bad idea to begin with, but it's expanded into a mind-blowingly bad idea and surprisingly fast. I don't think they're ever going to catch up with this, and I don't think they ever can. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know if that's necessarily the sort of thing you want to shut down wholesale, but wow, have they dug a hole for themselves. All right, here's another story that I think we ought to catch up on, and maybe we can tack it under the tech headline. Malware attack disrupts delivery of LA Times and Tribune papers across the U.S. This featured, of course, in the Los Angeles Times. Tony Barboza, Meg James, and Emily Alpert Reyes on this December 29th piece. We didn't get a chance to mention this, but now it's time, I guess. What first arose as a server outage was identified Saturday as a malware attack, which appears to have originated from outside the United States and hobbled computer systems and delayed weekend deliveries of the Los Angeles Times and other newspapers across the country. Technology teams worked feverishly to quarantine the computer virus, but it spread through Tribune Publishing's network and reinfected systems crucial to the news production and printing process. Multiple newspapers around the country were affected because they share a production platform. Maybe not wise. The attack delayed distribution of Saturday editions of the Los Angeles Times and San Diego Union Tribune. It also stymied distribution of the West Coast editions of the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. Now you're really talking about serious stuff. East Coast papers were affected, which are printed at the Los Angeles Times' Olympic printing plant in downtown Los Angeles. By Saturday afternoon, the company suspected the cyber attack originated from outside the United States, but officials said it was too soon to say whether it was carried out by a foreign state or some other entity, said a source with knowledge of the situation. We believe the intention of the attack was to disable infrastructure, more specifically servers, as opposed to looking to steal information, said the source, who spoke on condition of anonymity because he was not authorized to comment publicly. The source would not detail what evidence led the company to believe the breach came from overseas. Tribune Publishing said in a statement Saturday that the personal data of our subscribers, online users, and advertising clients has not been compromised. We apologize for any inconvenience and thank our readers and advertising partners for their patience as we investigate the situation. Every market across the country, or rather across the company, was impacted, said Marissa Colias, spokeswoman for Tribune Publishing. She declined to provide specifics of the disruptions, but the company's properties include the Chicago Tribune, Baltimore Sun, Capital Gazette in Annapolis, Maryland, they're having a hell of a year, Hartford Courant, Greg, what do you know? And the New York Daily News. The South Florida Sun Sentinel and Orlando Sentinel as well. No other details about the origin of the attack were immediately available, and the motive remained unclear. Tribune Publishing sold the Times and the San Diego Union Tribune to Los Angeles biotech entrepreneur Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong in June, but the two companies continue to share various systems, including software. It's unclear how many Times subscribers were impacted by late deliveries, and the paper could not provide firm numbers, but a source said that a majority received their papers Saturday morning, albeit several hours late. It's interesting. It's not really such a big deal, honestly, for the most part, if the paper comes late on a Saturday in particular. But it's the sort of thing, it's disconcerting. It's one of the rare kinds of disruptions that I think could really set people on edge or cause them to panic. A consumer item which they're used to having delivered or available at a certain time and with no question about supply or demand or anything of the sort. It's just there. It's just reliably there. Things don't show up. The store shelves aren't stocked. That's panic. Interesting. All right, so where do we leave off? They got all their papers several hours late. The Times said that print subscribers who did not get their papers Saturday would receive them with their regularly scheduled delivery of the Sunday edition, if they're also Sunday subscribers, I guess. Anyway, we apologize to our customers for this inconvenience, the Times said in a statement. We thank you for your patience and support as we respond to this ongoing matter. The Times and the San Diego paper became aware of the problem near midnight on Thursday. Programmers worked to isolate the bug, which Tribune Publishing identified as a malware attack, but at every turn the programmers ran into additional issues, trying to access a myriad of files, including advertisements that needed to be added to the pages or paid obituaries. After identifying the server outage as a virus, technology teams made progress Friday, quarantining it and bringing back servers, but some of their security patches didn't hold, and the virus began to reinfect the network, impacting a series of servers used for news production and manufacturing processes. By late Friday, the attack was hindering the transmission of pages from offices across Southern California to printing presses as publication deadlines approached. At one point, Times staffers were making contingency plans to hand-deliver pages from the editorial offices in El Segundo to its Olympic printing plant in downtown Los Angeles. Working through the problems created a logjam at the plant, and the resulting cascade of delays pushed back printing and delivery. San Diego was particularly hard hit by the problem, in large part because of the paper's position in the press run. Between 85 and 90% of the Saturday edition of the Union Tribune did not reach subscribers on Saturday morning, said Jeff Light, publisher and editor of the San Diego Union Tribune. Papers that should have arrived in San Diego around 3 to 4 a.m. instead arrived at 7 or 8 a.m., Light said. Because the newspaper relies on independent contractors to deliver the paper to neighborhoods, many of those people were not available later in the day to do the deliveries. Interesting. Good lesson in logistics there. The first signs of trouble at the Union Tribune came late Thursday night when sports editors tried to send information via digital files to the plate-making facility. But those digital files, which contain information that ultimately becomes the pages of the newspapers, would not transmit to the plate-making process. Editors seemed to be locked out of the system, having to perform workarounds. The transmission of community editions, including the Glendale News Press and Burbank Leader, also appeared in doubt Friday night. Ultimately, a page designer in Orange County figured out he could send all the community paper's news pages from his unaffected computer, said John Canales, executive director of the Times Community News. The problem caused widespread issues in South Florida, one of Tribune Publishing's major markets. The South Florida Sun Sentinel told readers that it had been, quote, crippled this weekend by a computer virus that shut down production and hampered phone lines, according to a story on its website. Malware attacks are extremely common, affecting millions of computers in homes, offices, and other organizations every day, said Salim Naino, chief executive of the company Cryptos Logic. In some cases, dubbed ransomware, the attackers disable the system and demand money, said Nino, whose company tackled a major ransomware attack called WannaCry last year. In other instances, the goal is simply to disrupt or break stuff by wiping systems, Nano said. And by the way, Nano was my guess at Neino, in case you need to contact this guy. Anyway, so as he said, in other instances, it's just the goal to break stuff. Malware has often also been used to quietly infect computers and then sell access to other cyber criminals who can steal banking credentials or exploit other valuable information, Nano said. Several individuals with knowledge of the Tribune situation said the attack appeared to be in the form of Ryuk ransomware, R-Y-U-K, so not just a casual mention of ransomware, I guess. One company insider who was not authorized to comment publicly said the corrupted Tribune publishing computer files contained the extension .ryk. I guess that's supposed to identify it, or it does identify it. I don't know if you want it identified, but there it is. Ryuk attacks are highly targeted, well-resourced, and planned, according to an August advisory by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services cybersecurity program. Victims are deliberately targeted, and only crucial assets and resources are infected in each targeted network. It was unclear whether officials or company officials had been in contact with law enforcement regarding the suspected attack, but Katie Waldman, no relation to me, by the way, a spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security, and that's how you could probably guess she's of no relation, said, "We are aware of reports of a potential cyber incident affecting several news outlets and are working with our government and industry partners to better understand the situation. Good luck." Tribune declined to comment on the specifics of the malware attack. Nano said that tracking the identity of attackers can be difficult since malware code is often freely distributed online. For instance, even if an attack appears to be Russian because of the malware family traits, Nano said, code still could have been sourced, weaponized, and deployed by an actor who downloaded it from an underground forum anywhere in the world. Pam Dixon, executive director of World Privacy Forum, a non-profit public interest research group, or so they claim, I don't know anything about them, said that usually when someone tries to disrupt a significant digital resource like a newspaper, you're looking at an experienced and sophisticated hacker. Dixon added that the holidays are a well-known time for mischief by digital troublemakers because organizations are more thinly staffed. And I guess in the olden days of hacking, you might have said the kids are home from school, but hackers are grown-ups now. Anyway, it's an optimal time to attack a major target, she said, and I think probably the better explanation for it is the thin staffing. True. The highest profile cyber attack of a media company was in late 2014 at Sony Pictures. Remember this? Sony Pictures Entertainment in Culver City. California gets all the good ones. Hackers, which the FBI later determined were affiliated with the North Korean government, broke into Sony Pictures' computer system and copied huge chunks of data, which they later posted online for the world to see. And that's another, speaking of unsolved or unresolved mysteries, I really would like to get a better explanation of how that whole thing happened and why, but we'll probably never return to that one. Anyway, I just thought I would put that one on the record for you because, well, we missed it, and I feel bad not reporting on something major that happened West Coast, but also because who knows what this is a preparation for. We don't know who did it, so we can only guess, but imagine if you were able to take out American newspapers all over the country at the drop of a hat. That could be troublesome. Okay, now a bit of Trump-Russia that I think we might need to catch up with. I'm not entirely certain. I have the feeling that a lot of this will have been clear, or among our guesses anyway, clear to us before, but I think this establishes some of the facts on the ground that we might need to fill in some of the still remaining blanks on one of our working theories here, which is what Paul Manafort was doing at the Trump campaign and how he hoped to extricate himself from crushing debt to the Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs that he was doing business with. Time magazine reports this one, December 29th, 2018. Simon Schuster, the writer here, and it isn't that awfully close to the Simon and Schuster Publishing House? Is that the right name for it? Well, I doubt he got ribbed about it too much when he was a kid, right? Sure. Anyway, here's the story, exclusive. So there you go. Russian ex-spy pressured Manafort over debts to an oligarch. I think we all must have guessed this was going on, right? I feel like it's not entirely revelatory here, but we might as well read through it here. When the U.S. government put out its latest sanctions list on December 19th, the man named at the top did not seem especially important. Described in the document as a former Russian intelligence officer, he was accused of handling money and negotiations on behalf of a powerful Russian oligarch. The document did not mention that the man, Viktor Boyarkin, had links to the 2016 campaign of President Donald Trump. Like, why even bother mentioning that, don't they all? A months-long investigation by Time, however, found that Boyarkin, not related to Boyardee, by the way, Chef Boyardee, this is someone completely different, found that Boyarkin, a former arms dealer with a high forehead and a very low profile, they really had to take that long walk, really, was a key link between a senior member of the Trump campaign and a powerful ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Sounds familiar, right? In his only interview with the media about those connections, Boyarkin told Time this fall that he was in touch with Trump's then-campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, in the heat of the presidential race on behalf of the Russian oligarch. He owed us a lot of money, Boyarkin says, and he was offering ways to pay it back. I think we all heard about this, but now we have a name, the name of the middleman. Anyway, the former Russian intelligence officer says he has been approached by the Office of Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who is investigating, can you believe it, possible collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. Boyarkin's response to those investigators? I told them to go dig a ditch, he says. Peter Carr, the spokesman for the Special Counsel's office, declined to comment. Through his spokesman, Manafort likewise declined to comment on his alleged connections with Boyarkin. But those connections could be potentially important to the Special Counsel's inquiry. They would mark some of the clearest evidence of the leverage that powerful Russians had over Trump's campaign chairman. And they may shed light on why Manafort discussed going right back to work for pro-Russian interests in Eastern Europe after he crashed out of the Trump campaign in August of 2016, according to numerous sources in the Time investigation. Next section is entitled Our Friend V. Guess who that is? When he joined the campaign in the spring of 2016, Manafort was nearly broke. The veteran political consultant had racked up bills worth millions of dollars in luxury real estate, clothing, cars, and antiques. According to allegations contained in court records filed in the U.S. and the Cayman Islands, he was also deeply in debt to Boyarkin's boss, the Russian billionaire Oleg Deripaska, who was demanding money from Manafort over a failed business deal in Ukraine and other ventures. Boyarkin says it fell to him to collect the debt from Manafort. I came down on him hard, he says, but the American proved elusive. I find it hard to believe that they could have come down on him that hard, but it's not. Is he capable of running? I mean, if they really wanted to come down on him, they could have come down a lot harder than that. In a petition filed in the Cayman Islands in 2014, lawyers for Deripaska, a metals tycoon, right? We've heard that he's a aluminum magnate in past incarnations. A metals tycoon. I like the use of the thesaurus on that one. With close ties to the Kremlin, complain, these lawyers do, that Manafort and his then partner had, quote, simply disappeared, unquote, with around $19 million of the Russians' money. Really? Manafort never disappears, really. Anyway, when he reappeared in the headlines around April 2016, Manafort was serving as an unpaid advisor to the Trump campaign. He wanted his longtime patron in Moscow to know all about it. In a series of emails sent that spring and summer, Manafort tried to offer, quote, private briefings. We've heard about these. about the presidential race to Deripaska, apparently, as one of the emails put it, to, quote, get whole, unquote. Reports in The Atlantic and The Washington Post revealed those emails in the fall of 2017. Among the questions that remained unanswered was the identity of Manafort's contact in Moscow, the one referred to in one of the emails as, quote, our friend V. Even after Time learned his full name in April, he proved a difficult man to find. His online presence amounted to digital scraps, one photo of him at a conference in Moscow, a few benign quotes in the Russian media from his years selling arms for state-linked companies, and some vague references in U.S. government archives to someone by that name, Commander Viktor A. Boyarkin, serving in the 1990s as an assistant naval attaché at the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C., a job sometimes used as cover for intelligence agencies. Interesting. My first inclination, of course, when people talk about our friend V, is Vladimir Putin, but in this case, Viktor Boyarkin. Interesting. All right, let's continue. Only in early October was a Time reporter able to track Boyarkin down. In the company of a senior Russian diplomat and two young assistants from Moscow, he attended a conference in Greece that was organized by one of Putin's oldest friends, their other friend V, the former KGB agent and state railway boss Vladimir Yakunin. There's lots of V's around here. How did you find me here? Was the question Boyarkin asked repeatedly when confronted about his ties to Manafort during a coffee break at that conference. Never take a coffee break. Once he agreed to discuss their relationship, not sure why he would, but he did, it was mostly to confirm the basic facts, often with a curt, yes, so what? He did not respond to numerous requests for comment after his name appeared in the U.S. sanctions list on December 19th. The outlines of Boyarkin's career suggest a life spent at the intersection of Russian espionage, diplomacy, and the arms trade. Having served at the Russian embassies in the U.S. and Mexico in the 1990s, and I think the Russian embassy of Mexico should pay for it, I just add that, dealing primarily in military affairs, he says he turned his focus to the arms trade in the early 2000s. His specialty was the export of small and medium-sized warships, and other naval vessels that were produced in Soviet-era shipyards across Russia. That's the big kind of arms. This business kept him in touch with military buyers from around the world, including in various parts of Africa. By the late 2000s, he had put this expertise in the service of Deripaska, whose global mining and metals empire often involved making deals with despots in the developing world. But his range was broader than that. As Boyarkin tells it, his acquaintance with Manafort goes back to around 2006, the year Deripaska asked both of them to help redraw the map of Eastern Europe. Sure, I'll be right over. The Montenegro connection is next. Yes. Almost got to mentioning the Montenegro name yesterday when I was thumbing through the most recent additions to NATO, but never did get that far. Montenegro, a tiny Balkan nation on the Adriatic Sea, borders on the Adriatic, for those of you who remember the Cheers Coach's song on Cheers about Albania. They too border on the Adriatic, I guess. Montenegro was an important testing ground for Manafort's relationship with Deripaska. The oligarch had invested heavily in that country, buying control of a vast aluminum smelter in 2005 that accounted for roughly half of Montenegro's exports and a sixth of its economy. The following year, he decided to support the Montenegrins' drive to become an independent country. That meant breaking away from its more powerful neighbor, Serbia, and convincing the world to recognize Montenegro as an independent state. To get this done, this is worrisome now that I know about their NATO status, to get this done, Deripaska offered the help of several of his advisors, including Manafort. They were a good team, says a senior official in Montenegro who was involved in that vote. They helped get the support we needed from our international partners, both in Russia and the West. says the official, who spoke to Time on condition of anonymity. After the people of Montenegro voted by a margin slightly above 55% to declare independence from Serbia in May of 2006, all the world's major powers recognized the results. Manafort has been open about his role in the campaign. Indeed, I would say there's probably not much to hide about that one unless we uncover some more here. I have always publicly acknowledged that I work for Mr. Deripaska and his company, he said in a statement to reporters in the spring of 2017. For example, one of the projects involved supporting a referendum in Montenegro that allowed that country to choose membership in the EU, a measure that Russia opposed. In fact, Moscow never tried to stop Montenegro's independence, and Deripaska would not likely have supported it so robustly without approval from the Kremlin. In 2007, he told the Financial Times, "I don't separate myself from the state. I have no other interests." Okay. There was never any real resistance from Moscow to the independence vote, says the senior official in Montenegro, who was involved in lobbying for Russian support in the years before and after that referendum. The Kremlin, he says, was only too happy to have another potential ally in Eastern Europe, when it was heavily dependent on Russian investments. The arrangement suited Montenegro's leaders just fine. Better the Russians come here with suitcases of money than with columns of tanks, says the official. But their relationship with Deripaska quickly soured in much the same way it began, over money. After years of disputes over unpaid debts, the Russian billionaire sued Montenegro in 2014 for seizing the aluminum plant he controlled. The country then sped up its plans to join the NATO military alliance and integrate with the West. Wow, so absconding with a aluminum smeltery. The Kremlin wasn't pleased. Minister Sergei Lavrov said for another Balkan state to become a NATO member. According to investigators in Montenegro, Russian agents soon began plotting to unseat leaders parliament friendly. By coincidence, the two ahead in the fall of 2016, at the same time as the U.S. presidential race. Three of the elections, Montenegro dependent whispered a set of most of whom changed and developed to the Russian movement known in Montenegro as the Democratic Front. They were counting on help from an American lobbyist who had worked in their country before and who happened to be fresh out of a job in Washington. His name was Paul Manafort. Enter Manafort. Having served for 3 months as Trump's campaign chair in 2015, Manafort was forced to resign in mid-August after his links to Russian interests in Ukraine became public. Still deep in debt, he reportedly went around pitching his services as a consultant in the months that followed to a wide variety of foreign leaders, from the Kurds in Iraq to the incoming president of Ecuador. The Time investigation found that Manafort was also in contact with politicians from his old stomping grounds, Montenegro. Among them was, oh boy, here we go, Nebojsa, N-O-B-O-J-S-A, Nebojsa, Medvedev, leader, then campaigning to unseat the country's pro-NATO leaders. Thanks a lot, Manafort. His ties to Manafort were first reported by Time by a former associate of Montenegro's ruling clique, who said the American consultant had met with Medvedev to discuss a possible consulting deal in the fall of 2016. First, the tip seemed implausible. Why would one of the world's most prominent political advisors, still fresh from the chairmanship of the Republican presidential campaign, consider working with a group seen as pro-Russian upstarts in a Balkan nation of 600,000 people? The senior Montenegrin official suggested an answer. If Manafort got involved here in 2016, it would only be through the Russians, he said. At the time, Russian indeed politics, according to the sanctions, December 19th, Deripaska and Boyarkin were, quote, involved in financial support to a Montenegrin political party ahead of Montenegro's 2016 elections, unquote. In more than a dozen interviews that Time conducted this year, officials and political leaders in Montenegro confirmed that Deripaska and one other Russian oligarch bankrolled pro-Russian opposition in 2016. Two of them said they heard Manafort's name come up in strategy meetings for that opposition movement. When asked about Manafort's role, Medojevich, I'm hoping it's even close, one of the leaders of this movement, confirmed that he had met with Manafort to discuss a potential partnership in the fall of 2016. He added that the meeting was a disappointment and that no deal came out of it. In several follow-up conversations, however, he refused to talk about the meeting, saying that his contacts in the West were legitimate and urging reporters not to publish his initial comments. For Medojevich and the rest of the opposition, the elections in Montenegro did not go smoothly. The day before the vote, a group of men was arrested and charged with plotting to overthrow the government of Montenegro, assassinate its leaders, and seize power by force. Yow. All with abundant help from Moscow. The Montenegrin authorities later charged two agents of Russia's military intelligence service with masterminding the alleged coup. Several of the leaders of the opposition in that country, including Medojevich, are currently on trial for charges that stem from the alleged coup attempt. Were they at this point a NATO ally? I mean, does that not strike anybody as worrisome that there was a Russian plot to assassinate leaders of a NATO-allied country and overthrow its government? Or maybe they hadn't entered yet and were just on the verge of doing so. Would that count? Wow. The following year, Montenegro's parliament overwhelmingly, here we go, ratified membership in NATO. So we're off the hook. It was just this coup attempt against somebody who was months away from entering NATO. So the following year, Montenegro's parliament overwhelmingly ratified membership in NATO as pro-Russian demonstrators protested outside. Russia's foreign ministry said lawmakers were, quote, trampling all democratic norms and principles, unquote. Now the was under attack. Took with that burden. Montenegro is a country of young people, he said, after being asked by Fox News in July if the U.S. should come to Montenegro's defense. He doesn't want to crap all over a NATO ally completely. He's just not going to defend them. They're tiny. Who cares about them? But they're very strong. They're strongly strong people, and they'll be just fine on their own. They are very aggressive people. They may get aggressive, and congratulations, you're in World War III. He doesn't even know what he's saying. Wow, what a kook. Known unknowns is our next section. Everyone loves those. It remains unclear whether Manafort actually provided any services in Montenegro in 2016. So that went him from Gade. Not a Montenegro politician here. Whether Manafort owes debts to Deripaska, and if so, how much? Deripaska likely has some idea, but we don't. A court in Virginia convicted Manafort in August on 8 charges of bank and tax fraud related to his lobbying work in Ukraine. He's due to be sentenced in February. Boyarkin, for his part, denies having anything to do with Montenegrin politics. When Time met him in Greece, and that's the dateline of this piece, he said he had not worked for Deripaska since the end of 2016. The U.S. government differs on that point. The December 19th press release from the Treasury Department said Boyarkin reports directly to Deripaska and has led business negotiations on Deripaska's behalf. Those negotiations involving mining deals in Africa and factories in Europe were of secondary concern to U.S. investigators when they contacted Boyarkin last year, he says. They wanted to know about his links to Manafort and the private briefings he had offered to Boyarkin and his boss. They asked him about all of that, yes, the operative recalls. Once again, he says he told them to get lost. Well, that wraps it up, but opens some new fronts and adds some new names to watch in our rogues gallery. And I don't know, I have the feeling that we might have needed that update for the coming couple of weeks, especially as Manafort faces sentencing in February. Okay, let's wrap this up and move on. Okay, so today, being New Year's Day, I thought it might be interesting to pick up this piece from Think Progress. Jason Linkins wrote this piece entitled, "We Never Got Closure on These Political Micro-Mysteries of 2018. From Paul Manafort's ostrich jacket, remember that, to Scott Pruitt's near-fatal nap. We're still looking for answers. I don't know how much we're going to learn per se, but I think we'll be reminded of a couple things, and seems like a pretty decent way to use our New Year's Day, after all. So how about I'll take a look here. If you've spent any time covering President Donald Trump's White House, God help you if you have, but that's not in there, or following those who do, you've probably encountered a catch-all metaphor that illustrates what it's like to contend with the daily deluge of breaking chaos that flows hour after hour into the news cycle. It's like the writer's room for a prestige television show has gone rogue and thrown every plot device they can imagine at the wall until the wall buckles and the ceiling collapses. Thursday, December 20th, was one of those days that epitomizes this phenomenon. The day began with the news that Trump was set to sign a sweeping criminal justice reform bill. Remember that one? One he'd championed, and which had received resounding bipartisan support. It was going to be a win for the president. If he'd been running an ordinary White House, his staff would have been directed to carefully stage manage the day so that no other news could break and step on the big moment. But this is not an ordinary White House, and so instead, Trump's decision to withdraw troops from Syria, an abrupt move that seemingly was made without much thought or consultation at all, I would add, pushed the president into an inflamed encounter with Defense Secretary James Mattis, who promptly resigned in a letter that spelled out in gruesome detail all of their philosophical differences. And that news broke after everyone had learned that Trump, in the worst play run in Washington since Jim Zorn's ill-fated swinging gate, had decided without warning to scuttle a deal that would continue to fund the government, renewing the possibility of a government shutdown after many legislators had left Washington for the Christmas holiday. That is kind of tough, isn't it? Oh well, that's too much, man. That's actually in there. There have been so many different plot lines happening at the same time that it's been effectively impossible to stay on top of them all. At the end of 2018, we're looking back at all those times we lost the thread on some bizarre twist or hastily introduced character the Trump White House threw in our direction. The stories that fascinated us for a time crowded into the headlines, then got dropped as 17 new and unrelated developments clamored for our attention. These are the micro-mysteries of 2018, on which we are still waiting for closure. It's a good idea for an article. Let's see how this develops. First, the case of the near-death nap. Former Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt spent the entirety of 2018 going above and beyond the call of duty to implicate himself in an increasingly outlandish series of mishaps. Pruitt was a virtuoso at turning the most mundane of activities, like renting an apartment or recommending his wife for a job, which really shouldn't count, into spectacular displays of self-destruction not seen since John O'Hara penned Appointment in Samara. I wish I were literate enough to know what was going on there, but let's take it for granted that that's an excellent metaphor, and we all love excellent metaphors now. At one point, is it a metaphor? It probably isn't. All right, well, anyway, screw the whole thing. At one point, 3 Washington Post reporters were assigned to investigate why Pruitt, quote, directed EPA security agents to drive him to multiple locations in search of a particular lotion on offer at Ritz-Carlton hotels. That is some lotion. Pruitt's beleaguered security detail figured prominently in another story that remains unresolved. On March 31st of this year, ABC News reported that Pruitt's security team had to bust down the door to his home, apparently believing he was, quote, unconscious and unresponsive and needed rescue, unquote. Per ABC News, the following excerpt: the incident occurred in the late afternoon of March 29, 2017, at the Capitol Hill address Pruitt was renting, which was co-owned by the wife of a top energy lobbyist. A Capitol police officer called 911 at the behest of Pruitt's security detail, which had tried unsuccessfully to reach him by phone and by banging on the building's front door, according to police recordings obtained by ABC News. They say he's unconscious at this time, the 911 operator is told, according to the recordings. I don't know about the breathing portion. After Pruitt's security team gained access to his condo, however, they discovered the EPA had groggy and, quote, rising from a nap. Pruitt declined medical attention, and everyone was left wondering what had caused the alarm in the first place. The EPA had to foot the bill for the damaged door, and no one spoke about the matter ever again, leaving us all to wonder, was this really a case of a nap gone wrong? Oh, wait, where's my, don't I have my sound effects around for this? There we go. Of course, the nap gone wrong. What else could it be? Oh, my God. I forgot all about that. The case of the two Zinkies is what's next. Oh, you know what? I think I changed some things. I'll probably get better sound quality out of that output and that music. What do you think? No? It's about the same? It feels a little muffled to me today. All right. Well, we didn't really need it. The case of the two Zinkies should be intriguing enough for us to forget about that. Another member of Trump's ghastly crumb cabinet, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, figured prominently in a bizarre incident that took place in Washington, D.C.'s Lincoln Park neighborhood in November. As the Washington Post reported, residents of the 100 block of Kentucky Avenue in southeast D.C. ended up in a row with the driver of a Mercedes SUV that sat idling, taking up several parking spaces in an area where places to park are often scarce. That's pretty much everywhere in D.C. The driver of the car refused to identify himself to residents, saying only that he was waiting for his boss. Resident Paul Legere, I'm guessing at the pronunciation of Legere, was in the midst of remonstrating, how do we say that, with the mystery driver, when suddenly a man identifying himself as Ryan Zinke emerged from Zinke's apartment. Only it was not Ryan Zinke, a fact that Legere, Zinke's neighbor, immediately pointed out by saying, "Dude, you're not Zinke." Eventually, the man identified himself as Scott and went back into Zinke's apartment. From there, things degenerated. Profanities were exchanged between Legere and the driver. The U.S. Park Police were called to the scene, apparently by Zinke, who had contacted his security detail about, quote, a suspicious individual staking out his home and guests, unquote. When the police arrived, however, the idling car had left, leaving only the puzzled neighbors at hand to explain what had happened. The Post went on to report that sometime around 10 o'clock, the, quote, guest who impersonated Zinke, along with 3 or 4 other men, all left the house and piled into the Mercedes, unquote. The Post report doesn't really clarify if this Mercedes was the same one as before. The incident was apparently all the talk of the Lincoln Park email group by the next morning, according to the Post. As one member of the group put it, perfectly summing up this era, nothing makes sense anymore. That's really true. Next up, this is a big one. The case of Brett's big debts. I like the way that rhymes. In the years to come, as we recall the nomination hearings of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh and the matters that were left unresolved, the serious and credible sexual assault allegations levied by psychology professor Christine Blasey Ford will likely figure most prominently in our memory. The hastily thrown together and hamstrung by design FBI, quote, investigation, unquote, into the charges gave Republicans just enough political cover to confirm him, but missed an opportunity for Americans to learn the truth and get used to that. It's worth pointing out that had Ford not come forward with her claims, there were still some mysteries about Kavanaugh that could have used a little unraveling, chief among them the story of how Kavanaugh incurred and then suddenly paid down a staggering amount of personal debt. A lengthy account from Mother Jones's Stephanie Mensimer lays out some of the unanswered questions. There was money Kavanaugh owed on various credit cards and a loan against his retirement account, an amount reported to have been somewhere between $60,000 and $200,000 that Kavanaugh managed to settle between May of 2017 and the time of his nomination in July. There was the $1.2 million house he purchased in 2006 at a time when his reported net worth of $91,000 would have made gathering a needed $245,000 down payment seemingly impossible. And then, of course, there was his expensive baseball fandom. As the Washington Post's Amy Britton reported in July, Kavanaugh managed to incur tens of thousands of dollars of credit card debt buying baseball tickets, or so he claimed anyway, right, over the past decade, and at times reported liabilities that could have exceeded the value of his cash accounts and investment assets. Kavanaugh explained that he'd run up those costs purchasing tickets for a ticket draft between him and his friends. In his written response to the Senate Judiciary Committee, Kavanaugh explained, quote, "Everyone in the group paid me for their tickets based on the cost of the tickets, to the dollar. No one overpaid or underpaid me for tickets. No loans were given in either direction," unquote. Like many of the explanations Kavanaugh offered, Mansomer chronicles them all, his account of how he managed this expensive habit landed somewhere between propriety and shadiness. Just plausible enough to pass muster, but leaving questions behind, such as, don't well-connected Washingtonians just finagle free tickets to the Nationals? That's the whole point of having baseball in D.C. Interesting question, though. It's best that you not do that. Next up, that's it. I mean, that's the resolution. Remember, these are stories without resolution. The next up is the case of the bird skin bomber. What is this? Oh, yes. Did you recently come into possession of an ostrich leather jacket? Perhaps obtained from some government auction of seized assets? If so, why are you not dining out on the fame of having this cherished piece of clothing once belonging to Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign manager and obsessive crime completist who... Really? Completist, yes. Completist. What is that? Completist. Where are these words coming from? You're killing me with your $10 words. These are fantastic. You must have been using a thesaurus. Who was convicted of tax and bank fraud in the ongoing Mueller investigation earlier this year. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Mueller investigation is that it has so far been profitable for taxpayers, a fact that seems to have escaped Trump, who frequently intimates that Mueller's team is running up a huge tab. It's true that as of the most recent filings, which cover most of the investigation through March of this year, Mueller's expenditures total something in the vicinity of $25 million. However, thanks to the vagaries of Manafort's plea deal, Mueller seized between $42 and $46 million worth of assets. Manafort's famed ostrich jacket was presumed by many to be among that collection of assets that would have been moved to a government auction house. But as it turns out, it may never have left Manafort's possession. Oh, I didn't hear about this one. As the Daily Beast's Adam Rawnsley reported, it's an open question as to whether the jacket, quote, could be a part of a criminal forfeiture, unquote. And I guess now more quotes from the Daily Beast. According to an invoice that is part of the court record, Manafort bought it from Alan Couture in April of 2013, along with other bespoke menswear, totaling $102,000. Bank records Alan Couture entered into evidence show a $102,000 wire transfer from Pompolo Limited, one of 31 offshore companies Manafort created. Whoever says onshore, how did I even make that mistake? So where were we? Bank records show $102,000 wire transfer from Pompolo Limited shortly thereafter. But that transfer isn't included on a list of unreported income transactions alleged by the government, meaning the feds might not be able to lay claim to it even if there's a guilty verdict. How weird. And clothing isn't on the list of assets the government has indicated it will go after, like some of his real estate properties are. That ends the quote from the Daily Beast. Now back to Think Progress here. Furthermore, it's not clear that the jacket would fetch much money in a resale. That's probably fair to say, or at least not as much as they wish. As Eric Bradley, the public relations director for Heritage Auctions, told the Daily Beast, it's a used jacket that would only be attractive to a limited clientele. nor does his notoriety add any appreciable value. At auction, we would estimate it at about $2,000 to $3,000. Editor's note, it is also unspeakably ugly. Not my editor's note. That's actually Jason's own editor's note. Based on all of this, and it wasn't really the editor, I bet. Although, who knows? Maybe the editor did chime in on that. Based on all of this, it seems likely that this piece of outerwear remains hanging alongside other ill-gotten pieces of couture in Manafort's wardrobe, though no one can really say this for certain. Regardless, it's fair to say that the need to decide the fate of an ostrich jacket has to be the strangest ever result of a FARA investigation. Moving on then to the case of the incognito opinionist. What is this? The New York Times opinion page lives to troll all decent people with half-baked inanities, but no single piece of dross produced by Times opinion editor James Bennett caused more alarums and excursions than "I am a part of the resistance inside the Trump administration." Ah, yes, penned by an anonymous mystery author who may or may not still be in government. Our brave hero explained that while he, and let's face it, it has to be a man, totally shared most, if not all, of the Trump White House's policy goals, he was nevertheless part of a cabal of insiders dedicated to thwarting, quote, parts of his agenda and his worst inclinations, unquote. Why unquote? I don't know, because we're about to dive right into a quote from that very same piece. A short one. The root of the problem is the president's amorality. Anyone who works with him knows he is not moored to any discernible first principles that guide his decision-making. Back to Think Progress, where Jason says, and yet these insights are not limited to those dumb enough to join the team. Nevertheless, the author goes on at length about all things obvious. Have you heard? Meetings with Trump, quote, veer off topic and off the rails, unquote. He's impulsive and prone to rants. He makes half-baked, ill-informed decisions. It's sadly clear that the author thinks he's laying this bare for the very first time. The author goes on to insist that a steady state exists within the White House, running what amounts to an ongoing administrative coup d'etat in the executive branch. It seems to have occurred to nobody, not the author, not the New York Times opinion page, that leaving the safety of the nation in the hands of an unelected and unaccountable league of extraordinary factotums is not the ideal solution to the problems described in the piece. As of this telling, we have no idea who this anonymous author was, despite that the paper's opinion desk is in the same building as dozens of reporters who might want this incredible scoop. Though at this point, the only good reason to unmask this author is to ridicule him. After all, in the time since this anonymous op-ed writer introduced this steady state fighting Trump's most dangerous tendencies, this unnamed gaggle of resistance fighters has done nothing but demonstrate their own hilarious incompetence at their self-appointed task. Next up, the case of the fraudulent frame. Coming in just under the wire is a genre classic, answers to a mystery that only raise more questions. Back in June of 2017, the Washington Post's David Farenthold, who has carved out a steady and entertaining beat plumbing the depths of Trump's many vices, noticed that a framed cover of a Time magazine featuring Trump festooned the walls of many of his properties. The cover in question, which featured a glamour shot of the real estate mogul, if there can be such a thing, and headlines attesting to the fact that he was, quote, hitting on all fronts, even TV, unquote, was quickly exposed as a fake. A spokesman for Time confirmed there was no issue of the magazine on the date printed on the cover, March 1st, 2009, and indeed Trump did not feature on the magazine's cover at any time that year. Farenthold would go on to document the numerous places throughout Trump's empire where this fake cover hung, but one place he did not find the cover was Trump's brag wall in his Trump Tower office, a special place where Trump hung his most prized media mementos. That is, until this week, when Politico ran a photo that finally proved that the fake cover adorned that wall as well. This, of course, would have been last week, and embedded is The tweet, which includes Politico's photo and over the shoulder of one of the folks in the photo, not Donald Trump, is in fact a glimpse of that framed fake Time magazine. On Twitter, Farenthold went on to say that the question he was left with after his first attempt at reporting out the story was whether or not Trump was in on the fake. I thought he must have been in on the joke, Farenthold wrote. Who would believe they were on the cover of Time if they really weren't? I could never find pics of the fake in Trump's office, and since it wasn't there in his space, I figured he was in on the joke. Never assume this, says Jason. At any rate, as of right now, the identity of the person who created this replica of Time magazine, which featured many actual Time headlines, along with the barcode on the cover, which actually turned out to be for karaoke software, interestingly enough, is unknown, but it has to be Michael Cohen, don't you think? I don't think he's capable, but an interesting guess. Lastly, I think, more miscellaneous mysteries, just to round things out. These examples are but a few of the many micro-mysteries which have been left unsolved. There are so many others. Omarosa Manigault Newman, who was unceremoniously ejected from her White House perch earlier this year, God, that was this year, was allegedly in possession of, quote, a stash of video, emails, text messages, and other documentation supporting, unquote, a numerous of zingy claims. I don't know if that's really what he meant, but let's say numerous zingy claims laid out in her tell-all book, Unhinged. But after a slew of audio recordings released to the media on September 10th, Newman's haul of goodies dried up. What happened to them? Back at the beginning of November, right-wing vaudeville act Jacob Wohl and Jack Berkman staged a bizarre press conference at a Holiday Inn in Rosslyn, Virginia, just across the Key Bridge from the district line. Those reporters in attendance had been told that the two men would be presenting a woman with a credible accusation of sexual impropriety against special counsel Robert Mueller. However, it quickly became apparent that there was no accuser on offer, and the only truly noteworthy thing for anyone to report was that Berkman spent the whole of the presser with his fly down, all of which led to the inevitable question, is nobody going to tell Berkman about that? That was a bizarre episode, wasn't it? And those guys are still alive and doing things. Infrastructure Week. Lastly, did it happen or not? We don't know. Did it happen multiple times? Ultimately, we may never obtain the answers to these unresolved riddles, and in a few short days, we'll be on to a new calendar year, and what's likely to be a fresh crop of new micro-mysteries to briefly bedevil our imagination before they, too, get discarded in another flood of exhausting breaking news. Obviously, if you can help us solve any of these lingering puzzles, please get in touch. Also, we'd be happy to receive a copy of the President's tax returns, if you happen to have one. Well, eventually we're going to get a hold of that, although I have my doubts about what that will reveal, quite honestly. But a nice compilation of the micro-mysteries, the unsolved micro-mysteries of 2018.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.